Okay, welcome everyone. This is the 19th meeting of the Elders for Disarmament and the Cultures of Peace. And we usually start all these meetings with a special welcome to newcomers. We invite people who are joining us for the first time to briefly introduce themselves. By putting their camera on. We'd love to see your face and know a little bit about yourselves. I see there are a couple of new people, so if I could invite you to briefly introduce yourselves. You'll find the bios of all the other members who've been around for some time. All those bios are on the website, and that's why we don't do another round of introductions at this stage. So who are the newcomers?
I think I'm new.
Carenza.
Yeah, so I live in
Carenza.
France.
Yeah.
I live in France. I was born during the Second World War. And I'm just horrified at what's happening in the world now and the increasing lack of morality in our politics. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Carenza. And a very warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. Is there anyone else who needs to introduce himself or herself at this stage?
Albert, puede ser que tú quieres decir algunas palabras.
Hola, gracias, Gracia, igual, y me ayudas a traducir.
Sí.
Yo soy Albert Chan, soy indígena maya del sur de México. Colaboro con el consorcio, pero también desde estos lugares estamos con mucha preocupación por lo que sucede con el avance de los gobiernos de ultraderecha, por ejemplo. Saludos a todas y todos y muchas gracias por la invitación.
Michelle.
Bienvenido, Albert.
Would you like to translate?
Es un gusto.
Sí. Michelle, would you like to translate or you like me to say?
Yeah, I'll let you say. Yeah, and I'll supplement if we've missed something. But if you could.
Yeah, thanks. So Albert is very happy to be with us. Is indigenous from the Maya Quiche in the Yucatan of Mexico, and he is preoccupied not only for the issues of militarization in general, but also for the advance of the rights in the world in many places. And he's fantastically able to be with us because of the transcripts. That it's an interesting new way of doing things. Yeah, in these meetings.
Yeah. Gracias, Albert. So, if there are no more newcomers,
maybe, yeah, I don't know if I present myself. I did it the last meeting, but I'm not sure if everybody was here in the meeting. So my name is David.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm professor of philosophy here at the University of Sergipe in Brazil. And this elder of the future here is my daughter, Pietra. So what's your name? Pietra, very good. How old are you?
4.
4, very good. So she's the elder of the future, all right? And so yeah, we live in Brazil and we have maybe, I don't know, a situation that could spark some war in the future, which is the recent installation of database centers here in the northern of Brazil, where water is already very scarce, and data centers will put more pressure over the population in this part of Brazil, and I'm afraid that this also could lead to some kind of civil battles or civil war or whatever. So yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you very, very much for that introduction. Yeah. Anyone else? I don't want to miss anyone. Please step forward if you haven't introduced yourselves before. If this is
That's fine.
your first time.
No one else, Michelle.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Welcome again, everyone. So before we move to our presentation, it's a very exciting presentation today, and we will, I'm sure, learn a lot and share a lot with Mazin and Karima. I'll introduce them a little bit later. We thought we would first hear a few announcements and mentions of reports about initiatives and new resources that would be useful for the group. So I'd like to keep to the agenda that we suggested and invite announcements and brief highlights of new reports, initiatives that are relevant to the conversations that we engage in this particular group. If no announcements? No?
Michelle, I raised my hand. I don't know if you see it.
Oh yeah, now I see you. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Grazia,
Also,
Grazia,
Jeff.
yeah.
Also, Jeff.
Grazia and then Geoffrey. Yeah.
Yeah, I just would like to, rather than a report, because there would be quite a bit to report about what is going on in Europe and in Italy, specifically around the Stop Rearm Europe and Stop Rearm Italy movements. I would like to ask everybody interested in being more involved with these two particular movements to get in touch directly with me, because there are preparations for future events that are happening, and it would be nice to be involved even more than we are at the moment as participants. Only one thing that I like to share is that we wrote a letter in which we participated actively to the members of the European Parliament, just denouncing the horror and the silliness, in fact, of the rearmament in our continent that is squandering resources that should be much better spent. And this letter was signed by around 800 organizations that are members of this Stop Rearm Europe, but not very many are very active. So we need to all be more proactive. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Grazia. Your camera has switched off. I don't know if that's deliberate, but just want to say. So I'll move on to Geoffrey.
Yeah.
Hi, greetings from Montreal.
Geoffrey?
I just want to quickly let you know about a symposium we had called Watersheds of Life. Grazia participated, which I was so grateful for. But I'm bringing it up here because we are centering our work here more and more around the Gaya-Naragua, the Great Law of Peace, which is the law that this land that I live on in Montreal and around in the territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy was built on. It was the law that emerged from this place and from the relationship of the custodial people here with it. And we're gathering together, synthesizing what came out of that, and hopefully there will be some sustained work that keeps Goa centered, and I'm happy to keep you all informed about what develops out of that work.
Great.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Any more hands up? Let me just check. No, I don't think so. Okay, so that's it for the announcements and reports. We regularly update the website. We regularly update the website with new documents, new reports, and it is worth looking at the website of the Elders for Disarmament. There's a very rich panoply of report statements, and various people have told me, external to this group, said they find it a very good set of resources. So that's where most of our updates, the more substantial updates and reports end up. So, Karima, I see you've yeah. So this is this afternoon we or this morning, depending where you are, we will be discussing some very serious, troubling matters, and there is a point that has been shared by one member of a group about the presence of a young child in the room, because of the nature of the topic. So I just want to share that quite openly. The conversation will deal with some very tragic circumstances, some very troubling issues. Some hope, of course, but there is a concern that has been raised about the presence of a young child with the possible impact of the conversation. So I'll just say that, and I leave it up to the father to decide whether, and the daughter decide if she want to stay in the room.
Thank you, thanks for thanks so much. I asked her to leave the room. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to move to the main part of our session today, and that's the presentation, which would be a shared presentation between Professor Mazin Kimche and Ms. Karima Kadaoui. I'm not sure if I pronounce your second names well, and if I'm not, I really apologize. You'll have to school me into pronouncing them in the correct way. But I will be calling you Mazin and Karima, and I hope that's okay. So both Mazin and Karima are going to focus on this very complex, tragic topic that we've all been experiencing from very close or from afar, but it's left us quite shaken, many of us. And it's the whole topic of how do you end suffering and sustain communities. What are we learning in particular from Palestine? So it is a forward-looking conversation, ending suffering, sustaining communities, and what can we learn from what has happened in Palestine recently, but also over historical time. So very briefly, Mazin is he's founder and the director of the Palestinian Institute for Biodiversity and Mobility, a very, very influential and effective organization in his region. He's a Palestinian geneticist. He's also a scholar activist, a writer, and a speaker, as well as an educator on the situation, the plight, the opportunities, the dilemmas of life in Palestine. Mazin was also a nominee for the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. Karima, no less, is an inspiring human and social gardener, a remarkable person from Morocco. She's a co-founder and the director of the Tamkeen Community Foundation for Human Development, and she's also a member of the Club of Rome. Both of them are going to share their perspective. Mazim will take up a little bit more time, about 20 minutes or so. It's not strict Mazim. And that'll be followed by a series of reflections, resonances from Karima, who will probably take the floor for about 10-15 minutes. But again, this is flexible. The reason we put time boundaries, of course, is that we would like to have a conversation, comments, questions, and some sharing of views afterwards. These sessions usually last an hour and a half, but we have a tendency to let them go on for a little bit longer if, you know, we're in the heat of a conversation, something's really important. But of course, people are completely free to leave when time's up. So I hope that, you know, we'll be able to keep to an hour and a half, but be prepared for longer. Yeah, and that's okay. So without further ado, can I invite Mazin to share some thoughts on this whole topic of ending suffering and sustaining communities, and in particular, what are we learning in Palestine and from Palestine?
Well, thank you very much. I feel I'm among friends, so I'm going to be a bit more personal in this conversation, more than I usually do in topics like this in the past. And part of the reason is I was awakened at 5 o'clock in the morning when my sister called and said that my cousin has died. He had kidney problems. He's 73 years old, and so we obviously spent much of the day in the usual Palestinian traditions of mourning, and I took my son for the funeral, which happened later in the afternoon of today. Now it's night here. But anyway, in the afternoon, about 3:30, we had the funeral, and we went to bury him in the cemetery where I showed my son, who's visiting from San Francisco, I showed him the graves of some of his ancestors, like my maternal grandfather, who was orphaned in the First World War, lost both his parents and all his siblings, and had a very, very difficult life. Was born in 1908, died in 1999. So at 91 years old, lived a long life, and was able to see all the tragedy of what happened here in Palestine. And he was my idol, this maternal grandfather of mine, because of his resilience, his ability to survive despite all odds, numerous wars, ethnic cleansing, etc. He was, obviously witnessed the Nakba of 1948 and the Naksa of 1967, the massacres, etc. Anyways, as I reflect on this, family, of course, I'm speaking to you from Beit Sahur, which is the shepherd's field where the angels foretold 2,000 years ago of the birth of Jesus, which is just up the hill here in Bethlehem, within walking distance of my house, the birthplace of Jesus. And we Palestinian Christians, of course, honor these traditions, unfortunately, because of what's happening in Gaza and also the death of this cousin. We're not going to have a Christmas season this year, so we will just have the traditional prayers and stuff like that. It'll be religious festivities, no other events. But anyway, as I was also reflecting today on this death and on my all my uncles, my father, my mother's graves there, I showed Danny these things, and we were talking about these things. We were saying, basically how lucky we are in the sense that at least the graves are still there. Most of the graves in Gaza have been desecrated, have been bombed. People are living in tents, and we just had another rainstorm, the second one this season. The last rainstorm a few days ago, 14 people died of cold, living in those tents that don't cover anything. And some of them are also living in the streets because they don't have tents, and Israel has forbidden any kind of tents coming into Gaza for the past few months. So the genocide goes on in Gaza, and today also, while even I was at this funeral services, I received messages from my colleagues in Gaza. The person who died, my cousin, was a doctor at a hospital here called the Jam'iyya Al-Arabiya Lit-Ta'hil, which is the Arab Society for Rehabilitation. And he had helped a while back in getting this person from Gaza, a child who actually had cancer in his spinal cord, and they had operated on him, but unfortunately he developed scoliosis, severe scoliosis, and is in a wheelchair. So we brought him for rehabilitation, tried to do something, and then he went back to Gaza. And this was several years ago, but anyways, in Gaza, he's living in a tent with his family. His name is Muhammad, and his father's name is Islam. Islam's mother just died last month in Gaza for lack of medical treatments. And he called me and is begging for support, help getting his son out of Gaza for urgent needed medical care, which is not available in Gaza anymore because the hospitals are all destroyed. So anyway, I tried to reassure them. I tried to tell them I will try, but I really don't know what I can do. There's not much I can do since, we are mere mortals here, and certainly, this is beyond my scope of helping. The other person who sent me a message is Hiam from Gaza. I brought her to the US when she was 7.5 years old in 2001 because she was shot in the eye by an Israeli soldier, and we got her a prosthetic eye, and she went back to Gaza. Anyway, her mother just had a stroke 3 days ago. She has high blood pressure. She had the clot, and again, I go to the so-called field hospital that's available. There's not much they can do for these cases, so basically they sent her home and said hopefully she will somehow overcome this, but she needs also medical treatment. She cannot get out. These are the lucky ones actually who still have families. Other friends of mine, their families were obliterated, including some friends of mine who were killed, massacred in Gaza. I have one friend whose whole family is under the rubble, basically, of a four-story building, and they haven't been able to remove them for the past few months. They're not counted among the dead in Gaza because they are not issued birth certificates unless there is a body to go with it. I mean, death certificates. So anyways, now why do I tell you this? I tell you this because I'm 68 years old and I'm getting in this period of my life where I am thinking about resilience and thinking about the future for Palestine. And if you are hoping to hear from me a kind of upbeat message about the future, I'm sorry to disappoint, but I think humanity actually, I give us as a species, as a biologist, as a scientist, as a medical geneticist, if I was to diagnose the human condition, I would give it a 70% chance of not recovering. In other words, that we will destroy this planet or engage in a nuclear war, and I give that a probability of 70% happening at this stage in my life. I used to be a bit more optimistic a few years ago. But still, when I say 70% chance of bad thing, that means 30% chance of a good thing possibly happening. And perhaps we need to collectively reflect on how we increase that 30% probability. And so what have I done with my own life from my childhood? I've been working my ass off for human rights, for Palestine, etc. I engaged in my first demonstration against injustice when I was 10 years old, and so life goes on, and new generations will come, and new generations will have to struggle. And of course, our struggle in Palestine is one of many struggles. One could see what's happening now around the world, be it in Western Sahara, for example, or in Tibet, or in Venezuela, the attack on these fishing boats, and so on, or in the US, or what happened yesterday in Australia with two guys that shot a group of Jews. And there was a Muslim guy actually who wrestled one of the shooters, and a Muslim hero that was trying to save Jews. So successfully he did it actually, but he was shot by the second gunman actually after wrestling the gun from one of the gunmen. So we see these things around the world. We see the struggle around the world. And how do I try to wrap my mind about these struggles and what brings the nature of humans to do such evil, horrific things to fellow human beings, like a genocide, an ecocide, a scholasticide, a medicide that's happening in Palestine as we speak, even in the land of supposedly the land of peace, or city of peace, Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. Even today, a kid, 16 years old, was killed just less than a mile away from where I am now, killed by the Israelis. How do we wrap our minds around this, and how do we think about it? And one could try to, as a scientist, I always try to analyze things scientifically, but there's a limit to that. There's an issue with that. There is, of course, the greed that drives wars, and billionaires who are becoming more and more billionaires as a result of this profiting from war. The ideas of racism and chosenness, the chosen people, God's chosen people, or the white race that's more, privileged than those savages, as they call us, or barbarians, or terrorists, whatever, to justify what they are doing. One could bring up other issues, whether it's narrow-mindedness or lack of knowledge, etc. One could engage in endless hours of discussion about what drives these wars. And as a biologist also, when I look at these things, I have to also look, is there a genetic predisposition to conflict among humans, sort of a remnant from our primate ancestry of chimpanzee tribes sometimes fighting over territory or tribalism or something like that. Again, each one of those ideas there are books written on them, and I won't belabor this. So I go back to the personal. What is it that I, and however, if I have 1 or 2 or 5 years left in my life, what is it that I want to do? And so we set up this institute for biodiversity and sustainability, actually, precisely to try and do something, leave a legacy that's continuing. My wife and I donated money, and we are planning to donate all the rest of our retirement for this institute to keep it going. It's concerned about sustainable human and natural communities. And why is this therapy, and if you want, for my psychosis? Today I spent the only time I went to the Institute in between those funeral rites. I went to the garden because I cannot go a day without actually doing something in the garden. And just before the rain started, I took some irises out and spread them out so that they will bloom soon after this rain, which just started now in the evening. It actually started while we were taking the coffin out of the church to the cemetery. So I thought, while the rain is dripping, to everything there's like the yin and the yang of Chinese Buddhist philosophies, etc. I was thinking in the rain how a blessing the rain is for these plants that I planted. But I was also thinking of how a curse this rain is for the people in Gaza who don't have any shelter and whose tents are flooded. And then I thought, well, maybe that's the way life is. It's supposed to be exactly like that. It's supposed to be both suffering and growth. It's supposed to be both yin and yang, if you want. And, when the old, Native American guy was asked, what life is about by one of his grandchildren, he said, well, you have 2 wolves fighting inside of you, a good wolf and a bad wolf. And the kid asked him, well, which one wins? He said, well, the one you feed more. So I don't know, maybe I'll read to you a poem or 2 from things I wrote about 2005. This poem in particular resonated with me as I remembered it after the funeral. It says, I written this in 2005. When I die, bury my ashes in my town, joining my memory with that of the beloved soil that gave us life, education, and love in Palestine, under the uncompromising sun and the skies that tell no lies. In Palestine, when we learn to plow rocky soil, where we learn to plow rocky soils, and dance the dabka, sway the magic of Nai and Oud, Fairuz and Kulthum, mother's tender words inseparable from a meal, Zayt and Za'atar in Palestine, where we worshipped in mosque, church, and olive groves, where we learned to live together every day, even when not knowing it would be our last day. In Palestine, where we hated the occupation, the land confiscation, the US-funded army, where we mourned friends lost, where we resisted by staying, living, and loving. Sorry. And when we could not stay, we stayed connected with all that was good and worthy of our love of Palestine, where we got to school dodging bullets, checkpoints, walls. كيف المحسوم اليوم in the refugee camps, the loneliness of the غربة. We still married, had children, laughed, cried, lived, and loved. We taught our children to kick the ball, to say أهلا وسهلا, and to believe that our ashes join a million spirits of ancestors who lived and loved, and children who live and love. We still teach them, like 20 impossible, we shall return to Palestine. And our children will live in freedom in Palestine. I will stop here and we can talk some more. I can read another poem for you later if you like.
Und Palästinenser hatten wir noch nicht jetzt. Aber es war klar, die Sympathien. Ne?
Ja.
Mhm.
Und was war die Frau nochmal?
Ja, Grazia, die war eigentlich
Thank
eine
you.
Pflegerin. Nein.
Mazin, I think if others are speaking, you could mute your microphone. We can hear background noise. Mazin, thank you very much for that. We'll obviously come back to you after hearing from Karima. Karima, is it okay for you to share your thoughts now?
Ja.
If you can you mute Barbara?
Also, das war eigentlich nie so das zweite Sprache. Aber warum nicht?
Excuse me.
Aber da
Can you
Funeral heute, das habe ich natürlich alles nicht mitgekriegt.
I believe whoever is controlling
Das ist Grazia.
can reach down there and mute. So
Yeah, you have mute button for the others.
I don't know where that is actually.
The three dots above their
participants.
name.
Participants, yeah. And
Ja,
and you'll see the list.
Mazin heißt er. Mhm.
And
Mazin heißt er mit Vornamen. Geoffrey Garber.
I'm sorry, I cannot find it. In the three dot. Okay. No. I probably I can now. Let me see. No.
if you have like a cursor, you can move the cursor over to her box, and in the right corner, there should be a way to mute.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm not very experienced. Okay, the three dots, yes. Mute, fine. Great.
Thank you, Grazia. Yeah. Okay. So I'll invite Karima, who would like to share some thoughts, resonances, following the very moving testimonial of Mazin. Karima.
Hi. Allah yarham your cousin Mazin. الله يرحم الجميع, all those that have suffered. And have passed away. I'm really struggling to speak right now.
I can very much sympathize, if I may say this, because I was crying while Mazin was speaking, and I do understand what Karima is feeling, and so maybe we just need a moment, and we need to say to Mazin how touching his speech was and is for so many of us. But Karima, you're strong. Go for it.
I don't want to fight my tears, not my grief, because that means I'm still a human being. That means I can still feel. And as long as I can still feel the suffering of somebody else, then I am still a human being. For me, the images of mothers holding their babies and begging us to see them as human beings. This is the biggest, the most horrifying expression of dehumanization, where even the recognition of the death, the recognition of the pain and the suffering is not there. I think I shared this before with you from the very beginning of this witnessing of what is unfolding in Gaza. I've been questioning my heart every single day, waking up in the morning, refusing to look away, and last thing at night before I sleep. And this is what we are able to see. There's so much more that we're not seeing. And even if we're witnessing, we will never be able to fully fathom what it means to experience such suffering. There was this young woman in Palestine that wrote this poem. She wanted to remain anonymous. She was afraid to become a target. She was talking about how that the scream in Gaza, as she's experiencing it, is a howl that cannot be heard. And yet my tears are pouring. And I'm grateful that they're pouring, because those are the tears that water our hearts, that grow compassion, that do not let anything hard find inhabited. In Gaza, we've witnessed the most abominous, terrifying dehumanization and violence and destruction. But we've also witnessing the most extraordinary expressions of humanity. And Mazin, yes, it was saying, maybe there's both. Maybe life is like that. But there's something else that is happening. You know what I did, Mazin, before I came here to meet you? I meet all of us. I call this young woman from a village next to Qsar Kbir. I don't know if you know Morocco. And I needed to hear that story to be able to be here in conversation. When I met that young woman the first time, she was sharing a story with other young people. And she was saying that in her village, there's a land, a communal land. And that communal land, every year, there was a decision on how to separate it, to be plowed. And it led to people from the same family to kill each other. It led to violence, to destruction. It led to cousins not to ever speak to one another. The authorities tried to intervene. There was nothing that could happen. This is a fourth generation or fifth generation of violence in that village. And then this young woman, she met at the university in her faculty. Other young people going back to their villages and their neighborhoods. And we were saying what we experience in our university. If we would have experienced it when we were younger, it would be very different. She asked them, and she asked us, Temkin, to go to her village. When my team went there, they were shocked by the violence that was amongst the younger children. The level of violence, everything expressed in violence. They asked them to make a circle. They refused to be in one circle. They made 2 circles. They refused to hold hands. The members of the community would avoid the land, the cursed land. But they decided to have those workshops on the land. It took 5 months. 5 months for them to accept to be in one circle. For them to accept to hold hands. For them to accept to hug one another. And when the children started to hold hands, and when the children started to hug one another, the parents coming back from the fields would come up on the hill and sit and watch them. That young woman told me the land. I'll tell it to you in Arabic, Mazin. الأرض اللي كانت كتسبب الموت والعنف ولات أرض الحب. The land that was a reason for hate, violence, and murder has become the land of love. This is one of the stories that we experience. We're not in a context, a geopolitical context. We're not in a context of genocide. We're not in a context of countries like the US or the European countries feeding the trauma, feeding the anger, feeding the unleashed hatred and dehumanization that is happening right now in Israel. By experiencing firsthand these stories, I can only say that the only thing that will get us out from this is to trust our humanity. When I asked Hafsa, what happened? What made them hold hands? She said they met the mirror. They met the mirror of love. And this is when humanity realizes itself in itself and for itself. I will stop there for now.
Thank you, dear Karima. Thank you. Yeah. It's hard to find words after both Mazin and Karima's testimonials. I think many of us have been shaken. Some of us are still crying, but we've been deeply touched by what you have said, both of you. We do, however, have a little bit more time together, and if some of you would like to share some thoughts, reactions, feelings, emotions, please come forward, and let's open up the space to a conversation of hearts and minds. I'd also invite people to look at some of the comments in the chats, and then I'll turn over to Chuck. Chuck, I think you were the first hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, no, very beautiful, very different things that both of you said, but putting us in touch with particularly you, Mazin, who are there experiencing some of this directly. But we're all seeing it or not seeing it, choosing not to see it at times. But I thought that the circle analogy that Karima was talking about reminded me of something that the Pope said in response to Vice President Vance when he was talking about how Christianity was all about taking care of your own family and taking care of your community. And he said, no, that's not right. That wasn't the teaching of Jesus. It was about reaching outside and beyond, and that the circle needs to be so much wider. It needs to include everyone. And I think that's a really key message. I'm really saddened in my own country. I'm in Switzerland now. I live in Switzerland and work for IPPNW there, but I'm an American, and just this whole concept of Christianity has become so warped and so taken away from the message of Jesus. It seems like that lack of connection is something that those of us who don't necessarily want to follow religions, I'm not a big follower, but we need to point this out, that the great teacher that they follow is taught them a totally different thing that they're not following at all. So there's a lot of power in Jesus, and in his actions and what he thought was important. So that's all.
Thank you. Shall we take Christopher and then we can comment?
Yeah, we'll take a couple of comments. Christopher?
Yeah, I think in this time of reflection as we approach the celebration of the birth of Christ, I think together with what Mazin has said, it's ironic that he who came in the name of peace, that his birthplace is scourged with violence. And I think it is interesting to maybe reflect on what the core of his teachings were. When he was cornered by the Pharisees and was asked, of all the laws of Moses, which one is the most important? Knowing fully well that it is a trick question because they wanted to prosecute him. He doubled the question by saying, of all the laws of Moses, these two are the most important. First one is honor and love thy God with all your heart and all your might. And the second, love thy neighbor as yourself. So here's something very profound in that statement that he made. He said, honor and love thy God, whatever you conceive to be God. Because just as we are not able to agree if we have a bottle or some simple three-dimensional object placed amongst 2 or 3 people, each one has a different perspective and interpretation ability of that particular object. Nobody has the ability to perceive a three-dimensional object in its totality in one go. And so how can we now profess to claim we understand God and thereby kill each other in the name of God? So that's food for thought. And the second is that love thyself, love your neighbor as yourself, which basically means you need to love yourself. So if you truly love yourself, how can you commit violence against somebody else? What baffles me and really disturbs me, and then I'll kind of end here, is that in my humble estimation, the root cause of all evil is the disconnect and the focus on differentiation rather than recognizing the commonality that we have amongst all of us. Mm. And when you think about Western education the way we have it, it's ironic. It's actually insane. In the sense that when you go to kindergarten, a child is encouraged to use both sides of the brain. You learn to cook, you learn the cognitive skills, you learn to count, you learn to sing, you learn how to catch a ball. You go to school, 12 subjects. You then go to university, it narrows down to 1 subject. You go to grad school, it's 1 chapter of the subject. You do a PhD, it's a paragraph of the chapter of 1 book. So you learn more and more about less and less. And when you take that to the extreme, in the end, you know everything about nothing. And you've lost the whole sense of commonality. So we are being conditioned to focus on the differentials, what makes this human being different from somebody else. And by so doing, we not only dehumanize the other human being, we are dehumanizing ourselves. And I think Mazin said it aptly by saying, in his opinion, 70%, the chances are 70% is we're going down that rabbit hole of differentiation. And one of the things that all indigenous wisdoms have in common is the focus on the commonality. And from that point of view, what Jesus Christ was saying is a reflection of indigenous wisdom by focusing on the commonality. And that's why the people that followed Christ was a very, in German we would say, Kunterbund assembly of humans, from prostitutes, criminals, you name it, tax collectors, they were all there. And the parable of the Good Samaritan says it all, because he wasn't a Jew, to make that lesson come clear. So I think we need to focus on our commonality and stop and reduce the focus on the differentials. That's my hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christopher. Very wise words. Yeah. I think we agreed to go back to Mazin and Karima before inviting other comments, questions. So I'll ask Grazia and Mark to hold. I want to give an opportunity to Mazin and Karima maybe to react to ideas, reflections that have already been shared.
Go ahead, Karima, if you want to say something.
I was going to tell you the same thing, Mazin.
Okay, well,
Salam. No, I just
go ahead. Yeah.
Salam in Arabic. Peace is how we greet one another on a daily basis. Peace, may peace be upon you. But salam is not a word that can be grammatically expressed in the future. We don't conjugate in Arabic in the future. We don't think tomorrow peace. The peace we think is the peace today. As long as we think as peace tomorrow, we are able to dwell in what dissociates us, as Chris has said. We are able to put priorities. We are able to say collateral damage. We are able to say it's a necessity because we're able to accept violence. And this is when violence finds a place in the present, because we have pushed away peace in the future. We may reflect our language and how we speak about peace. That is my first resonance.
Yeah, thanks. My last message to the email list was actually I put Jesus' Sermon on the Mount from Matthew 5-7. Luke had a shorter version of it, and they differ on the location. In Luke, it says Jesus spoke this sermon in a plain, somewhere in a plain, and in this area of Bethlehem. And Matthew, it says on a mountain, so people assumed it's the mountains of the Galilee, but nobody knows really where this sermon was spoken. But anyway, Jesus, that sermon is very, very powerful, and I encourage you to look it up and read it. If you're not on my email list, you don't have it. But anyways, you can look it up. It's Jesus spoke about, how the meek shall inherit the earth, how they, you have to be kind, you have to love your enemies. You heard that was said, not an eye for an eye, but I tell you, if somebody asks for your jacket, give them your shirt too. Things like that. This is totally contrary to Western philosophies as we know them since the time of the beginning of colonialism in the Middle Ages, basically. And that's totally anathema. And I don't understand how, for example, Europeans who profess Christianity went and butchered 150 million Native Americans and millions of blacks in the slave trade to the Americas, This is not certainly anything remotely close to Christianity. It's the opposite of Christianity, but they did it in the name of Christianity. The Crusaders came here in the name of Christianity. The Zionists came here in the name of Judaism, and so on. People do that. They use religion for their own purposes, so to speak, for political purposes, for greed, for whatever. The things that we can talk about, which I really don't want to get into now, but if you think about it, what did if I was to follow Jesus, as I imagine here in the shepherd's field in Bethlehem, believe that it's an important message. If I was to follow him, what did he ask to do for the future, not for the present? He turned the tables, for example, on those who were trading at the temple. The Pharisees, he called them sons of snakes because they were hypocrites. There was two groups of Jews at the time, or people who followed the Mosaic tradition. There were the Sadducees and there were the Pharisees. Sadducees believed in the Torah and in the law of Moses, and the Pharisees believed in a kind of a rabbinical structure and temples and rigid following, regimes and things like that they form rather than the substance, if you want. And Jesus, of course, stood against that, and that's why he ended up being handed over to be crucified by the Pharisees. The Sadducees were more in line with what he preached, which is you stay with the substance of the religion that then calling you to go kill these people that are your neighbors and whatever. The Pharisees later evolved to become what we call rabbinical Judaism today. The Samaritans stayed at the same philosophies, and rabbinical Judaism became this evolved traditions over time, structured the same way that and about the same time, by the way, that the Christianity also evolved, went from basically persecuted people following their traditions and the biblical narrative and all of this stuff, to become the state religion of the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire converted to become the Holy Roman Empire and started to use Christianity as a tool of oppression of other religions. So that is part, as a biologist, I say that's part of the evolution of things. Evolution is not necessarily always towards the better or the good or whatever. Sometimes evolution is what it is. It's whichever is more dominant or aggressive forms of a particular philosophy or ideology that takes on the other forms and becomes those. So we have now what's called Christian Zionism, for example, which is, in my humble opinion, is an oxymoron. You cannot be a Christian and a Zionist at the same time, because how could you be a believer in Jesus? And especially if you read things like the parable that was mentioned of the Samaritan or the Sermon on the Mount, or in the plain for that matter, they speak the same way of loving your enemy. How could you love your enemy and at the same time go butcher the ones you dislike? So this is an evolution of negative trends within both Christianity, Judaism, and in some areas also of Islam and other religions. I mean, you look at the Buddhists in Myanmar and all of this stuff. Buddhism is also not immune from this or any other religion. So this is what happens. Unfortunately, it's part of the nature of human societal religious evolution that can be fairly negative. And and overwhelming, certainly, and lead to massacres and genocide. We have to remember genocide was done in the name of all religions. There was not a single religion that escaped being used for genocide. This is something we have to reflect on as our weakness as humans. Okay, you can say, well, we need to widen the circle, we need to do, love each other, all of this stuff. It's all good and nice and works for people like me and you. But the reality is, who holds the power? I mean, it's Trump and Netanyahu and the fascist Prime Minister of Italy and people in Brazil like Bolsonaro and people in Colombia or elsewhere that are racist and genocidal and want to kill the indigenous people. And money speaks, and they have the money. We have only our bodies, and we try to. I mean, I was arrested many times for nonviolent resistance, obviously, and I think we keep trying, and we have to keep trying, and we must keep trying. But truth telling is also important. That's why I bring up the issue of Jesus turning the tables at the temple. Jesus was not a pacifist in the sense of saying, it's God's will, what can I do? There's nothing I can do about it. Jesus was very active, and in fact, that's why he was crucified, not because he was like, I'm kind to everybody. No, he spoke out against the powers to be, Romans and the Pharisees, and that's why he was punished for it. I think we have to also pay a price. Each of us has to carry their own cross, so to speak. I carried my cross. I paid my dues. I'm still going to pay more, I'm sure, before I go. But that's the nature of what we do, and then it's not contingent on the probabilities I mentioned earlier. Even if the probability was 1% of success, I would still be doing same thing I am doing. It has nothing to do with the probabilities of success based on some logical analysis of the human condition. I encourage you to read, like Franz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, or read Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, or Edward Said's Orientalism, to understand where oppressed people stand and what needs to be done to challenge oppression. Or Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King, for that matter, of course.
Thank you, Mazin. Thank you. I'm going to invite Grazia, and then Mark, and after that Paul, and then we have Olivier. So if you could come in that order, Grazia.
Thank you so much, and really powerful everything that everybody has said so far. I like to go back to a metaphor that Mazin gave us at the beginning, the one of the two wolves inside us, the so-called bad one and the so-called good one. And who is the one who becomes stronger and so-called wins? And Mazin told us is the one we feed more. And I think this is a very important metaphor in itself. If we want to go ahead and move to a more sensible, more human life altogether, we need to feed a part of us while remaining always conscious that the good and bad cannot be totally separated, cannot even be be seen from in being detached from one another. There is always that some of you have mentioned yin and yang, but I would go back to what Chris said, that communality is what I would call the good wolf inside us. And we need to feed that togetherness, that commonality, that humanity that Karima also mentioned, rather than feeding the other thing that is never going to go away totally, which is the selfishness, the fact of being, just easily angry or easily prone to take and rush. How do we, and that's the title of this conversation among us, how do we feed the good wolf? How do we end the suffering and we nourish that communal spirit with the awareness that it is not possible to escape the paradox, that there will always be, the cross to carry, and once in a while we all need to turn the table, even within ourselves. So as a group of elders, what can we do to feed the good wolf inside our societies? I think this is what I would like, beyond the wonderful feeling of being together and sharing these powerful words that we heard today. What can we do? Because there is more than just meditating on the terrible paradoxes that we all live today. What can we do? That's my internal need for an answer there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Grazia. So we'll hold that. We'll go back to Mazin and Karima, and maybe invite other people to reflect on that particular point you raised. But next I have Mark. Mark, can I invite you?
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Actually, the key point I wanted to make has just been made a great deal more eloquently by Grazia. It's not a question of which we choose, but how we induce movement at scale in that direction. And one of the reasons I joined the elders is I like the second part of the title in particular, which is promoting a culture of peace. I think that is exactly our goal. How do we promote a culture of peace? It's not in our gift to promote peace, but we can try and make the conditions much more likely to be realized through our actions. And I think the various metaphors that have been offered today are very good to make us reflect on how that happens. And of course, when we slide into conflict, it's a sort of avalanche movement of one thing contributing to another until the direction is almost impossible to stop. But I think peace is the same thing. If you manage to create a kind of movement towards peace, it can gain momentum and sweep everything else out of its way. So we talk very often about how things go into a negative spiral where bad things feed more bad things. But you can reverse the spiral where action in one direction actually reinforces and stimulates action in that same direction, and you sort of pull yourself slowly out of the ditch and build on top of that. So I agree with both Mazin and Karima said, and what Grazia has just put into words. The other thing is that I have to admit at the start that I come from the sort of Christopher Hitchens school of religion. I am highly skeptical about its value, aside from the value in inspiring individuals to act in the way they see fit. I think when it comes to institutionalized religion, history tells us that the effects have been anything but conducive to peace. And I guess the problem is not so much the message of religions themselves, but the way people interpret those teachings. and instrumentalize them for their own good. I mean, we have a group of Christians in the United States who are delighted with what's happening in Palestine and in Gaza, because it conforms with their reading of the apocalypse and is a sure sign that the rapture is on its way and that Jesus will come down and invite the righteous to sit on his right side in heaven. And that contributes, I think, to a sort of general putting on the brakes any natural tendency that we would have to try and end the war and begin rebuilding on the basis. If we look at countries around the world that are founded on religious grounds, so that's of course Israel, but it's of course many also Islamic states and so on, they are almost always not contributors to peace, but sources of considerable violence, both inside and among the countries. So I would be very wary, aside from personal faith and values, in counting on religion to take us much closer to peace. And finally, I live in Switzerland, like a number of others of you do, and the old 100-franc bill used to have an image of Saint Martin of Tours dividing his cloak to give half of it to the poor person. You will see in that image that he's on a fine horse, dressed in a full suit of armor, with a bit of a rag hanging off the shoulder, and he gives the poor man half of that rag. It's not as if he gave half of what he possessed. He made a rather derisory gesture in the direction of that poor person. So I think, there's a big difference between the symbolic value of some of these things and the actual value. And I think we should focus our efforts on things that are much more concrete, much more immediate, and a much greater chance of contributing towards setting in motion that positive spiral. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to Paul and then Olivier. Paul, do you want to come in? And then we'll turn back to Mazin and Karima. Paul?
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to thank Mazin and Karima once again for their very heartfelt and personal witness to what's going on in Palestine. Very touching, and it really silenced a lot of people, made us all very reflective, and it kind of pointed us in a direction of conversation that has turned out to be very surprising to me. Yes, we need to transform ourselves. That's probably where a big part of the focus has to go. We have to rethink and be reflexive about our values and who we are as humans and what our humanity means. Clearly, that is part of the solution. And perhaps there is some role for religion, although I'm watching the chat and I stand closer to Julie's point that we need to take religion with a pinch of salt. And I made the comment that in the 21st century, I don't see religion as an ally of peace and harmony. If anything, it has been hijacked, or there are other terms that have been used in the chat to indicate that, if anything, it's contributing to the violence and conflict that we are all facing. And what surprised me most is that this sort of conversation, if we focus on religion as a solution or transformation of the self and our own humanity as the solution, I'm afraid we're not going to get very far. We live in modern times. In the 21st century, what the individual does is really a consequence of the system or systems that they are embedded in. And if we are seeking solutions, we need to take a critical eye to these systems. The economic system that we are based on, an extractive one, a system that is exploitative of labor, is killing animals, 80 billion animals a year, is killing the soil, killing plants. It's not something that is peace-centric. The education system, Christopher mentioned, seems also to be on the wrong path, socializing us into isolation and into a wrong understanding of what it means to be human or what it means to be member of our community. Our health system, I mean, all the systems that we are living in are not peace evoking or peace centric. And these are what we have as instruments and tools that we can change. So I would be very interested in hearing from members of this group, where are the systems change solutions? Where are the systems change leverage points? And what can we be doing to reinforce some of the good that has been mentioned and some of the good forces, and perhaps discourage some of the evil forces beyond our own self-transformation? I think there's a role for the social sciences. I think there's a role for science as a whole. And I think that might bring us closer to an understanding of the current structures of power. And my worry is that if we don't pay attention to that and find systemic change solutions, it will soon be too late, because the other side, the forces of evil, if you will, are systematizing. I have seen within the last 12 months the kind of work that the Heritage Foundation has done and Project 2025, which provides a systemic blueprint for bringing on the kind of evil results that we see the current administration implementing. So I guess my plea to this group is, let's try to be less emotional perhaps about this and see whether within the time frame of the 5 to 10 years that we have for action, we can architect solutions that change the system within which we are all embedded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I have one final comment, and I think that's Olivier. Olivier, you raised your hand. You still want?
No, I've put it down.
To say something?
Going to be very long, but I'll write something.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, we really must capture the chat. There's some very, very good comments, reflections in the chat. So we've had three perspectives. Can I turn back to Mazim and Karima just for a few reactions, and then we can open up. I know we're coming up to time, but I'm sure there's different points, and what we heard earlier has elicited a number of thoughts on many of us. But first, Karima and Mazim, would you like to come in?
Karima, you want to go?
I thank you very much, Paul, for what you said. And at the same time, it is because we are able to be emotional and to feel these emotions that allows us to hope, to trust that we are able to move out. From this abyss of dehumanization that is pulling us in an extraordinary, I think, unprecedented way. Because there's something that changes here, and what we're learning of what Palestine is suffering and enduring, and Sudan and other places, is that despite all the systems that have been implemented and that crystallize power, control, and fear, despite all these systems that are there to create places and spaces that are dehumanizing, despite all the expertise that has been shown in our education systems and in our organizations to dehumanize. We are not. We are still looking for ways to coexist, to live together. We still have hope, even in the most extreme situations, and Mazin is a living example of it. So the witnessing has to be in both the destruction, but also all these expressions of extraordinary humanity. And at the same time, I think what is horrifying and terrifying is that we are allowing the normalization of genocide. We are allowing the normalizing the massacre of children. And if we do not go there, if we do not focus on the mechanisms that are being implemented, that have been implemented for years and years, but there seems to be an acceleration. That ability that we have to say, no, we are still human beings, that ability that we have to hope in situations of despair is slowly going to be numbed. So if there's one thing that, going back to your question, Paul, I would really reflect on what kind of mechanism, a global one, a governance one, that asks the question, how can we stop normalizing the genocides? How can we stop normalizing the massacre of children? Recognizing all the light there is, and also recognizing all the destruction there is. But if we just focus on the destruction, we will never have the energy, the ability to widen the gaze and to grow the trust in our hearts, in our humanity, in order to come together in one circle.
I mean, Grazia and Mark both asked very pertinent questions. Is where do we go from here? What is it that's requested of us? What can we do? How do we move forward? And Paul pointed out a very important aspect of this, which is we need to have the right diagnosis. To be able to provide the therapy. We cannot just use emotion, say, okay, we love each other, we hope for the best and we pray or whatever. No, we have to understand the structures of power so that we can dismantle them. And this is very important. Let me give you an example that would be easy to reflect on. I mean, during the time of slavery, what was slavery about, you know? It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a psychological problem that required expanding the circle of love, so to speak. Slavery was a business. It's money. It's, you know, there's the cotton fields to be harvested and somebody has to harvest them. In the Americas, for example. So hence slavery was good business for people. And morality is set aside when you have business, when you have money, when you have interests that go beyond the issue of, you know, dehumanization. Well, that's a symptom. That's not the underlying problem. The underlying problem was not the dehumanization. The underlying problem was the greed that left this need for subjugation of other people, for colonialism, for racism, for oppression, for stealing people's lands, for genocide of Native Americans or Aborigine people in Australia. That's what drove these things. And understanding these pretty much most of them economic aspects is obviously a very crucial element of trying to construct methods of resistance to those. And methods, I mean, just like I said, Jesus turned the tables at the temple. What was the tables about? It was about money, you know. The Pharisees, the priests, would sell the chickens, for example, for the people. You come and buy a chicken to sacrifice for the gods, and you buy it from us. You're not allowed to bring your own chickens. And you go in, or lamb, or whatever, and then you sacrifice it at the altar, and then we get the meat. We, the priests, the powers to be, get the meat. This is business, you know. It's a business venture. It is not about dehumanizing in the sense of thinking about superiority for some reason that some unknown reason. The superiority complex comes from a very well-known reason. What motivates Trump, what motivates Netanyahu, what motivated Hitler and Mussolini is very, very clear to anybody who reads history and understands history. So the answer is very obvious. The answer is joint struggle. Joint struggle means we get together, like we are doing now. We get together as people, not normalizing, as Katrina said, we normalize our feelings about genocide or anything, normalizing that there is an ongoing genocide. No, as Katrina said, no, we reject that. We reject the notion that this is normal. It is not normal to kill children, 20,000 children in Gaza. That's not normal. That's not behavior of rational human beings who are thinking about just hatred of the other because they are of different religion. No, there's a business behind it. There's money behind it. Look at the stocks of the corporations that are benefiting. The Halliburtons, General Electrics, Lockheed Martin. Look at their stock prices in the last 2 years of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and Palestine and elsewhere. Their stock prices continue to go up and up. There's somebody making money, and that person making money is not going to be thinking about love. That person has to be challenged. And to be challenged, they have to be challenged by people like you and I working together to challenge them, to turn the table, so to speak. That's what we have to do. And, I agree with Paul, religion can be very negative in many aspects. You don't have to be a genius to look at the history of, the Crusaders, for example, and how they turned Jerusalem into, and with their own description, they said rivers of blood in Jerusalem. There's Christianity, okay, but that doesn't make me anti-Christian. It's just stating the fact that greedy people, for their own interest, they manage to use religion for their own greedy purposes, and we have to analyze what drives them, and then as Karima said, we have to analyze what drives us. What is it that we want? Well, we want human diversity, we want biological diversity, we want sustainability of this planet. If you put what is it that we want and start working on it together by developing mechanisms where several people mentioned the word mechanisms to actually achieve those results. Working together, for example, I had a Jewish girl here spend 2 years volunteering with us in our own institute in Bethlehem. Her name is Zohar, and she's amazing, She went on the boats to Gaza, and she has a missing leg from a car accident, and yet she was working in the garden planting trees with us. And her presence here put to the lie the notion that Palestinians, Christians, Muslims, and Jews can't get together or can't live together. This is bullshit, We can live together, but it has to be lived together, not on the notion of a boot on my neck, oppression. It has to be based on equality. And equality requires us working together to achieve that equality. That happened in South Africa under apartheid. We have to remember there were whites and blacks who struggled together against apartheid. it was not a white versus black issue, and it was not like, well, if they love each other, or they have normalization, or they get together and drink tea and sing kumbaya, everything will be okay. No, there was a need for a struggle, and that struggle requires sacrifice, requires action, and this is what we Palestinians have put a mirror to the world to say, look, stop talking about there is something called human rights and international law when you are violating it, when the West is violating it, when the West is trashing international law. The last vote in the UN was Israel and the US voted one way with a couple of minor islands, and the rest of the world voted another way. But the rest of the world can't do anything. Can't do anything. Simply because there's a power structure, asymmetry. And hopefully China will pick up steam and reach a level of challenging the US. But without that, with this asymmetry, what can you do? ICC is paralyzed. ICJ, International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice, they are paralyzed. They cannot do anything. They've been delaying and delaying their judgments because they're afraid of the US, which imposed sanctions even on the judges. When the US even imposed sanctions on the UN person, Francesca Albanese, because she spoke out about human rights and she called it what it is, which is genocide. This is a UN commissioner basically appointed to look into the matter. Now she cannot even book a hotel. Her credit cards are suspended by the US. There's a power structure. There's a system that works against human rights, works against peace, works against what we want. So if we don't identify the system and challenge it, we can speak all we want about kindness and peace, but we don't identify. That's why I really appreciate Paul's intervention on this point.
Thank you, Mazim and Karima. I think we'll gradually have to bring this meeting to a close, buttons raised. Grazia again. Anyone else who hasn't spoken yet?
Yes,
Down.
I just
That
wanted
went
very
down.
briefly to
Grazia, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I briefly wanted to say to Mazin that the next meeting will be about the economic system and how it feeds this, what we have called in the group, the fog of militarization. And I think one of the most interesting thing that we have been able to do for one another in all these nearly 2 years of meetings that we have had is to blow some air into this fog of militarization and to look at the various elements of it. And for each and every one of us, I think has been a journey in which we have understood more about the roots of the militarization. But in a way, I hope that in being together, we'll build a trunk and we'll have some branches and we'll have also some fruits that would attract other people, because a movement of as we are 20, 30 people or sometimes even fewer is not going to change the world. But whatever we can be in terms of catalyzing a larger movement, especially of people like us who are so privileged because of our education, because of our capacity to connect with one another, because of the chances we have to think, to be fed, to be together. Well, we might be able to to enlarge this air blowing away the fog of militarization and violence and all that we consider the bad wolf. So next time in January will be more to the systemic part of the issues. Thanks, Michelle, for allowing me to say this.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd just like to say I think it's great that both Mazim and Karima focused on the personal, the values, our humanity or lack of humanity. All of us are interested in broader transformation to build cultures of peace. But I think it is very, very important not to forget that dimension of personal positioning, attitude, spirituality. I use the word spirituality rather than religions. And living as a commons amongst ourselves and with non-human nature. So I'm very grateful to Mazim and Karima for bringing this dimension of the personal, the emotions. They have a place in wider structural transformation, which is multidimensional. And I don't see them as opposed. They reinforce each other. I'm always reminded of some left-wing revolutionary friends, and I call them friends, who say, well, we've missed out on including spirituality in our quest for transformation. There's something with spirituality and humanity that is very, very important in this process of regenerating the conditions for peace and conviviality and commoning. So thank you both, Karima and Mazim, for raising these points. And it's been a very, very emotional and moving conversation. And I think it shows how safe a space it is for us to share these thoughts. So thank you, Karima. Thank you, Mazim. And we'll close with that, if that's okay. We've gone well over time, but I think it's great that we're able to do this. And of course, the recording will be available to everyone here and others who could not join us, unfortunately. So with that, I wish you a peaceful end of the year and look forward to seeing you next year. We'll send out dates a little bit later. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I put my email in the chat. People want to email me, connect.
Yeah, thank you, Mazin. We saw that. Grazia, it's important that we make sure we don't lose all the points made in the chat. There's some very, very good reflections, comments. And thank you for all those comments, Julie and many others. Very, as we build a picture to better mobilize for durable peace. Okay. So we'll close now. I'll let you close, Grazia. You're in control, as it were.
Thank you. No, I will close the recording, but I'd like to say as well, Happy New Year to everybody, and we'll see you again in January, and hopefully we will spring into action.
Thank you, Michelle. Grazie,
Okay.
Karima.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Mazin.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.